Hello everyone and welcome to episode 7 of my Lancastrians and Yorkists vlog. This time we're going to be looking at the, I was going to say the early years of Henry VI's reign, but really it's kind of the middle years of Henry VI's reign, the late 1440s up to and including the downfall of the Duke of Suffolk. This is the start of depth topic 3 of the Edexcel A-level unit, and it starts a few years after the death of Henry V and the accession of Henry VI. And the focus is on the problems arising from the personal defects of Henry VI, I'm quoting here, and the challenges posed to his authority by the downfall of the Duke of Suffolk in 1449 and the rebellion of Jack Cade in 1450. So this time, as I say, we'll talk a little bit about the personality of Henry VI and the background to these events in the late 1440s, and we'll get up as far as the downfall of the Duke of Suffolk in 1449 and 1450. So, first of all, Henry VI. Henry VI's reign had started in 1422 as soon as his father Henry V had died, but he was only 9 months old at the time, the youngest ever monarch of England. So he only actually began his rule proper in around 1437 when he was aged 15, at which point he was obviously mature enough and grown up enough to be able to take the reins. He's been heavily criticised both at the time and all the way through history for being militarily inept, for being physically and mentally feeble, and for being easily influenced by people around him. Contemporaries at the time noted that he was often poorly dressed, which was seen as being very unroyal and very unbecoming of a king, and also a sign perhaps of his financial difficulties. And that he was not interested in sports like hunting or jousting, which also went against the stereotype or the reassuring image of a physically active and healthy monarch. More positively, Henry VI is known for having been very devout, we might say very religious, and he established Eton, the school, in 1440, and King's College, Cambridge in 1441 to train future priests. After his death, the religious cult springs up around Henry VI and becomes known even for miracle cures. And this was suppressed by his successor, the usurper, Edward IV, but of course then revived by Henry VII, the Lancastrian, who succeeds him, or perhaps usurps him. Modern historians tend to be quite unsympathetic towards Henry VI as well, but it is worth remembering the following 5 things when you are criticising him. First of all, he follows a very successful father in Henry V, and it probably was unrealistic to expect similar successes to occur because very few kings have matched those triumphs. Secondly, and connected, the Treaty of Troyes was a disputed settlement never accepted by many of the nobility of the south of France and, of course, the Dauphin, who continues to fight against it right the way through Henry VI's reign. Thirdly, Henry V had left us quite significant financial problems when he died after spending really big on his wars. And it was very difficult to reclaim that from the triumphs because once you take over the running of a place, of course, you can't just plunder it. Tricky. Fourthly, getting the throne at 9 months meant that Henry VI never had an opportunity to develop as monarch or to learn from anyone kind of on the job. So he never saw his dad dealing with advisors or even selecting advisors, both of which become problems for Henry VI. And then fifthly and lastly, he seems to have inherited the mental health issues that his grandfather Charles VI of France had. And in that vein, it's probably worth splitting your analysis of Henry VI from around 1453 when he first suffers an extreme mental collapse. So before that, he is relatively engaged, not successful necessarily, but quite engaged. And after that, he seems to kind of lose all decision-making influence and perhaps even motivation. So very briefly, what happened before 1449, where we're wading in? When Henry VI became king as a baby, he couldn't rule. So a minority council was established of nobility, the main nobility of England, to sort things out for him. And the key people on this panel were Henry V's brothers, John, Duke of Bedford, who kind of took over the leadership of the war in France. He was often there. Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, who stood in for John here in England when he was away. And Henry Beaufort, who was an uncle of Henry V and also a member of the royal family, but through an illegitimate line, the Beauforts. We'll talk more about the Beauforts later on. For your A-level course, if you're studying this through Edexcel, you don't need to know about how the war ends in 1453, but it's worth just kind of briefly tracking back to that because it does inform a lot of the discontent around Henry VI and the animosity that Somerset in particular attracts, especially from Richard of York. So, as I said, Henry V's victories were probably the high water mark and definitely not sustainable as it turns out. But John, Duke of Bedford, does a pretty decent job in the early and mid-20s of holding the line. And he even wins a super impressive victory at the Battle of Verneuil. That's maybe not how you say it. It's spelled Verneuil. This was, again, when England was heavily outnumbered, but managed to win decisively against the Franco-Scottish army. And effectively, that takes Scotland out of the war as well. Scotland, who always unite with the French to fight against the English. However, having kind of stabilised things in the mid-20s, in the late 20s, Joan of Arc kind of emerges from nowhere as a kind of peasant taliswoman, leading, inspiring, influencing the French army and the French monarch into several important victories, and encouraging the Dauphin to get crowned as Charles VII when they recapture Reims, Reims, which is where the traditional kind of seat of French monarchy. Joan of Arc's influence is quite short-lived. It's only from 1429 to 1431, which was captured by the Burgundians and handed over to the English, but it is probably the turning point, and it contributes to the end of the Burgundian alliance in 1435, at which time I think they can probably see that the writing is on the wall and they jump ship to join the French. So all of this was well before Henry VI was even an adult, or really before he even starts to engage in any sort of leadership over England. So it's not his fault, but it is fair to say he doesn't really do anything decisive to address the situation. And the two main advisors that he relies on through the mid to late 1440s attract heavy criticism. So let me just sort of jump ahead. John, Duke of Bedford, had died already. In 1447, Humphrey of Gloucester is actually arrested and died in custody, probably had a stroke. And the same year, Henry Beaufort died as well. This means that there was an emerging and then definite power vacuum around Henry VI, which two fellas step into. Edmund Beaufort, the Duke of Somerset, grandson of John of Gaunt by his third wife. As I said, the Beauforts are not a legitimate line in the royal family, but he is Duke of Somerset. And William de la Pole, who becomes Duke of Suffolk, who had married... who had he married? I'll come back to who he married later on. Somerset and Suffolk used to be thought that they took advantage of Henry VI at this time, but now some people argue that they were kind of having to step up and fill in the gaps that Henry VI was leaving and kind of cover for him. They certainly both come to an agreement, probably with Henry VI, that the war with France would be better negotiated than fought. And so in 1444, they do that exactly that. They negotiate the Treaty of Tours, Tours. And this was not a great treaty for England. This in itself attracts a huge amount of criticism. It establishes a truce between England and France, so that might be seen as good, certainly neutral. But then Henry VI would marry Margaret of Anjou. They would get. She was seen as quite a low royal. She's the niece of Charles VII, and also quite a poor royal. Her father, René of Anjou, had no ability to provide a dowry, and that was seen as being a sign that this was beneath Henry VI, really. Also, in a secret part of the treaty, England would give up Maine territory in France. Maine is capital M-A-I-N-E. It's a place, not like the most important thing. And it's south of Normandy. This was so controversial, even at the time, that they kept it secret. The truce from 1444 lasts till 1449, and then it ends, crucially, when Suffolk has the idea that they're going to support the Bretons against France by attacking Fougères, by attacking the French in Fougères. That goes wrong in itself, and it also gives Charles VII the excuse to retaliate, and he then attacks Normandy and sweeps England out of Normandy in 1450 and Gascony in 1451. In the southwest, John Talbot hangs on to Bordeaux until 1453, when he lost the Battle of Castillon, but it's all downhill from there, and in 1453 completely over. Suffolk and Somerset both get a lot of stick for this. Somerset was in charge of the army in Normandy at the time, but we're going to focus on Suffolk because he takes the brunt of the criticism. He had actually fought for Henry V at Harfleur, Agincourt and Rouen as William de la Pole. He then married Alice Chaucer, who was related to the Beauforts, and that's one of the reasons why he became friendly with Edmund Beaufort, Duke of Somerset. But he was very unpopular by 1450 because of the Treaty of Tours, because of the Fougères attack, which had led to the loss of Normandy, and because he seemed to be benefiting himself at a time when the country was suffering. So he was part of the government, which now owed £370,000, which is about £168 million now, probably more now. It's an enormous amount. 10% of that was owed directly to Richard of York, which is his particular beef with Somerset and Suffolk. And at this time, the finances of the crown had collapsed from about £120,000 a year income under Henry IV down to just £45,000 a year under Henry VI. As I say, Suffolk himself, though, seemed to be doing all right. He'd become Chamberlain of England in 1447, Great Steward of England in 1445, and he was arranging a marriage between his son, John de la Pole, and Somerset's niece, Margaret Beaufort. And some people were suggesting that this was a play for the crown because Henry VI didn't have an heir at this time. So Parliament basically says after the fall of France that they move against Suffolk. He's imprisoned in the Tower. Lobbying is done on Henry VI to have him executed for treason, for being an evil counsellor. Henry VI really resists this. He's very loyal to his friends and allies. And instead, he decides to banish him for 5 years. Suffolk is so opposed at this time, it's so kind of controversial, there's so much hostility that he has to be escorted out of Westminster to stop a mob grabbing him. And he manages to get it onto a boat to the Low Countries, but that boat then is intercepted by privateers off the coast of Kent. He's taken prisoner and they behead him after a mock trial on the 2nd of May. They claim that they're doing this for the public good, which in itself is a sign of what is going wrong at this time. Henry had picked Suffolk, who was a poor advisor. He'd stuck with him despite the flaws in his plans, and it shows that his court, his government, was ineffective, perhaps even corrupt. It also demonstrates how when there's weak authority at the centre, Henry VI in this case, that there's anarchy around and outside that. His essential authority of the king was at least being undermined, at worst kind of collapsing. And this is how the decline, the downfall of the Duke of Suffolk illustrates the problems that Henry VI did kind of bring upon himself. I hope that's helpful. Next time we'll go on to look at Cade's Rebellion, which happens in 1450, and see how that kind of makes things worse. Thanks for watching. See you next time.